Welcome, everyone. Welcome to God and Peace, why we need to talk about God. I'm Julie Krull. As a little girl, I began talking to God after a near-death experience. It was my primary relationship for guidance, inspiration, and comfort. Everything from what I should study in college to who I was going to marry was a part of these common everyday dialogues. Yet it wasn't always safe to talk about talking about God or to talk about talking to God. In fact, I learned very early that it was a private conversation. Could talking about our relationship, our experience of God help bring about peace? Neale Donald Walsch, New York Times bestselling author of Conversations with God, and his new book, GodTalk, says yes. Neale says, not only do we need to have conversations with God, telling our stories about our talks with God will help reduce the divisiveness in our world. We achieve inner peace through our experience of God, and we can help bring peace to our relationships and our world by sharing these experiences with others. Today, we're going to encourage you to do both as we share a few of our true stories and what it means to be able to share more openly, freely, and frequently about God. So I want to bring in Neale Donald Walsch. Welcome, Neale.
Thank you, Julia. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share this time with you. How may I be of service?
Well, you asked, so here we go. I imagine we're going to be talking a lot about GodTalk. This is your new book. And we have some guests who wrote stories and shared in this way. But I imagine most people out there have an idea about talking to God in prayer and supplication. But you encourage us to go a little deeper. And you say, I quote from this book, suppose God engages in direct communication with everyone who seeks a conversation. Or to put it even more intriguingly, what if God is communicating with all of us all the time, even when we're not actively seeking such a conversation? You say in here, God communicates with words, actions, events, visions, images, and endless list of other phenomena. So most of us think of these things as intuition, Neale. Like we think, oh yeah, I had intuition. I had a vision, or I had a word, or I had, and you talk about that in the book. So let's begin there. What's the difference, if any, between how God communicates directly with us and our sense of intuition?
Well, there really isn't any difference. You put it perfectly when you said, what's the difference, if any? And the answer is, in my understanding and in my experience, there is no difference. We're simply using different words. Because my experience in life has been, if we walk around saying, God just told me this, or I just had a conversation with God, people tend to look askance at us. They may even marginalize what it is that we're trying to describe. But if we say, I had an intuitive hit, or I had a psychic hit, or I had a hunch, or an epiphany, or a women's intuition, whatever word we want to use that people can find acceptable in our society, because our society, based mainly, frankly, not as a criticism, but just as an observation, based mainly, frankly, on what our religions, and there are 4,000 religions on the face of the earth right now being practiced. And the largest number, the vast majority of those religions teach us that you can't have a conversation with God. You can have a conversation to God. You can say prayers to God, but God is not going to talk to you individually, for heaven's sake. And if you claim to be talking with God, that God is talking directly to you and directly through you, then they will accuse you of being a blasphemer. It's all about apostasy or heresy. So, Julia, in order to avoid being name called, in order to avoid being marginalized, and frankly, in order to avoid being sent to the hospital, to the 6th floor ward where they send people with which they claim to have, some kind of mental aberration, in order to avoid all of that negative response, we don't call our conversations with God what they are. We call them intuition. Yeah. Or a sudden hunch, or a moment of awareness, or women's, whatever we can get away with, that people won't look at us askance. But the answer to your question is, in my experience, there's no difference between what we call intuition and having a conversation with God. It's simply a description, a series of ways that we have of describing God's constant and continual input in our lives.
Mm. The constant and continual, I think that's a big part of what's important for us to really acknowledge and to deepen into an awareness of that. In this book, there's 3 sections. And in the first section, you really help us understand this process. And I'm going to read a quote from that I think is important. And then in the middle, you have several people who have contributed stories about their conversations with God. And then you close this book with the how-tos and why it's so important. So I look forward to kind of moving us through that. But first, I want to read this quote from this page, because I think it's important. People who hear God's messages and act on them enlarge not only their perspectives, but their prospectives. That is, the chances of their future being filled with real joy, personal happiness, individual achievement, valuable contributions to others, and true inner peace will very likely be dramatically increased. And that is the reason to talk to God. I love this quote. Talk to us about the prospectives, not just the perspective.
My whole life changed, Shirley, when I opened myself to my experience. I'd been having the experience all my life, but I wasn't necessarily open to it. And like everybody else, I was, thinking about it in a totally different way. But only, when I had reached rock, in my case, it reached rock bottom. I mean, literally, I was living on the sidewalk. I had no place to be. I was living on the street, sleeping on the concrete, going from person to person, asking if they could maybe spare a few dollars or even a few coins so that I could eat at the end of the day and maybe have a hamburger or a couple of French fries. And so then I had the experience of a direct conversation with God. And that it did change everything. As I began to accept, number one, there really is a God. Number two, God is actually connected with me. Number three, this being that I now call God is connected with every sentient being in the cosmos. And number four, most importantly, what this sentient being that I call God desires the most is for us to know ourselves as who we really are. And who we really are is an individuation of that thing. You know what the most important thing that I was told by God in my life was, Neale, all things are one thing. There is only one thing, and all things are part of the one thing there is. And we call that one thing by a variety of names. I call it God. And so I now have come to the awareness that I am an individuation of the divine. And that so are you, and so is every other sentient being in the cosmos. Did that change my outward reality? Of course, because it caused me to learn some things about how God creates the experiences in life that we choose to bring to us, which is through the power of metaphysics. And the wonderful thing about this is that God has placed within every sentient being an extraordinary ability, an extraordinary power. It's what I call the power of metaphysics. To put it in simple terms, as somebody, by the way, said many thousands of years ago, as you think, as you believe, so will it be done unto you. I had heard that in my life before, but I frankly didn't believe it. But then when I had my conversations with God, I thought, maybe I'll see if that could be true. And I wound up, by the way, I should tell people very quickly here, I did not write the book, Conversations with God, as a book. I did not sit down and think to myself, I think I'll write a book called Conversations with God. I was simply having a personal experience that I never dreamt in a million years anyone would ever know about, except I was told in the conversation, you will make of this one day a book, and it will be read by many people. And I thought, Now I gotcha. Because if I did think that it was all my imagination, I thought, now I gotcha. Because no publisher is going to actually put a book out by a guy who says, I mean, really, can you imagine? I was thinking of the publisher going out to the workroom floor and saying to his editors, hold everything. I got a guy here who's talking to God. Stop the presses. It's not going to happen. Nobody's going to publish a book by a guy who claims to be speaking directly to God. But in fact, a publisher did put the book out. I sent it to a small publisher on the East Coast of the United States. They published the book, and it didn't sell. I thought, it's not going to sell 500 copies, and it didn't sell 500 copies. It only sold 15 million. Not bragging, just saying. When God tells you something, maybe you should listen, and listen carefully. So now we have a book that's out there in 37 languages, still selling today, 30 years later, around the world. So how has it changed my life? I began to believe not only in God, but here's the essential thing, Julie. I not only began to believe in God, I began to believe in myself in a new way for the first time in my life. Why did I have to wait until I was past my 50th birthday to even get close to that kind of understanding? Let that be our question for today. And if any of you are listening, I don't care whether you're over 50 or under 50, pay attention, because God talks to us in a wide variety of ways, and she may be talking to you right now.
Breathe that in. There are so many important topics in this book in section 1, from the true nature of God, where we've got God all wrong, to how God is listening, to an explanation of how we are one with God, like Neale says. So Neale, I want to encourage everyone to read section 1 in GodTalk, but I want to jump to section 3, where you give the reader 7 tools to open the conversation and instructions to act on it. Like you just said, it was like all of a sudden you mattered, because it became quite obvious that this was something that was very real inside of you. So in section 3, you encourage the readers to speak more often and more openly about our experiences. And this is Peace Week. And it might seem like an unlikely topic for us. Like, what does talking to God have to do with peace? Why is it important to talk about our conversations with God? And what does it have to do with peace?
It has everything to do with peace, because most of the world, of those people who believe that there is a God, and by the way, people should know that's a very high number. Sociologists over the past 10 or 12 years have been asking a single question of people around the world. They've gone on, taken a survey, and they ask people a single question: do you believe in a higher power? And believe it or not, statistically, the answers have come back 8.5. This is statistical, reference. 85% of the people say yes, they believe in a higher power. But what they believe about the higher power is what is driving the engine of the human experience. With that many people believing in a higher power, what you think of that higher power becomes not unimportant. And here's what most religions, most of those 4,000 religions, teach us about God: that God is loving, for sure, but that God is also judgmental, condemning, and punishing, which gives us, as a species, gives our leaders, gives our nations, gives our individuals the authority, presents us with a model of behavior. I mean, if it's good enough for God, it's good enough for me. So I can also, therefore, be as loving as I try, but I also am judgmental, condemning, and punishing of anyone who does something with which I deeply disagree. And we've seen this all over the world. We've had armed conflict on this planet, Julia, for 92% of recorded history. That's just a statistical reference. That's true. 92% of recorded history, we've had armed conflict on this planet. And it's going on even today. They're killing thousands of people right and left in Ukraine, trying to simply decide where the boundary line is between the two countries. I mean, really? And we have other horrible instances of the violence on our planet as well. And not just physical violence, which is bad enough, but psychological violence, emotional violence, financial violence. The collapse of our financial system is all around the world. So if we changed our mind, what if we decided that God does not condemn, judge, or punish anybody? Dare we believe? Talk about a revolution. Talk about a revolutionary theological idea. Dare we believe that, yes, there is a higher power, but the higher power needs nothing precisely because it is the higher power. Therefore, it doesn't need our worship, and it doesn't need, our obedience, and it doesn't need us in 4,000 different religions to set forth a rules that we think are the rules that God wants us to follow, what we're supposed to eat or not eat, what we're supposed to wear or not wear, how we're supposed to dress or not dress, what we're supposed to say or not say, you know what, Julie, just to give you a real simple example, I was raised in a religion that told me, believe it or not, I was raised in a religion that told me that if other people didn't belong to my religion, it didn't matter how kind, how nice, how forgiving, how generous, how compassionate, how patient, it didn't matter how nice they were as people, they're going to hell anyway. Either you belong to this religion or you're all going to hell. And they've convinced billions of people that this is the God that is reality, that God says, no, you don't understand. You got to come to me through this particular doorway or you're out of here. Not only are you out of here, but I'll cause you to feel suffering, unbelievable anguish for the rest of eternity because you simply chose the wrong religion. Are you kidding me? So how would it change the world? Would it bring peace to the world if we had a new idea about God? If we dared to suggest that God has given us the power to create our own reality individually and collectively, our collective experience on this planet and elsewhere in the cosmos. And if we dare to believe that God will not punish us if we make a mistake and do it in a way that's more damaging than it is beneficial. God's not sitting up there going, Neale said it again on the program with Julie, and they're both going to hell. This is the God you believe in? Because we dare to suggest that God loves us more than anything else in the world, and that God would never punish us for anything, least of all because we've broken one of the thousands of rules that they say exists. I mean, come on. Would you treat a 2-year-old child that way? Would you punish a 2-year-old child for spilling the milk at the dinner table? Because that's what 2-year-old children do. And guess what, folks? Most of us on the planet are acting like 2-year-olds. But God does not need us or require us to be, do, or have anything, and we will never be punished by God. So can we please believe that we are made in the image and likeness of God? That's the irony, Julie. The irony is that most religions teach that we are made in the image and likeness of God, but they've got the image and likeness of God all wrong. Yeah. And if we changed our idea about that, we would change our ideas about ourselves, and that would change our experience on the planet. I could, of course, be wrong about all of this.
However, we're going to bring on some others who have had these same experiences. So thank you. That was a beautiful explanation. And I love the term that this book brought to me for the first time, separation theology. You teach that God is not out there, but in here, and we can call on this interior God source. But I love the term separation theology, that this isn't just an illusion, but we've learned how to think about God from that perspective of separation. I want to read one more quote, and then we're going to shift to our individual stories of our storytellers in the book. But this quote is important, and I just want to ask you one question about it, Neale, on page 170. Ooh, this is so good. It's going to be a little long. I apologize. In the moment of our remembering, we join those teachers in consciousness. We become one in consciousness with the only consciousness there is. Once we have discovered this secret, many of us float in and out of that one consciousness during the days of our lives. The great spiritual teachers simply remained there. We can remain there too, or we can at least reside there a lot longer than most of us know. Do you know how to do that? There's a trick to it. This is what I love. The way to remain in a higher state of consciousness, connected to the one consciousness that is to help another person remain there. That is why I'm inviting you to talk more often and more openly about God. It is why each of the great teachers did what they did, spending their lives reminding everyone else that we are all one with God and one with another. This is a beautiful prescription from the book, Neale, that I think is so helpful for us to remain in that state of consciousness. Can you just give us a thumbnail response to why that is important and how that helps others?
Because what we do for another, we do for ourselves for a very good reason. There's only one of us in the room. There is only one of us in the room. And we've been told this. There's a reason, folks, why virtually every spiritual master you could name, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Moses, Mother Mary, men and women throughout the years, Catherine of Genoa, Julian of Norwich, Joan of Arc. There's a reason why every spiritual master you could think of was a teacher, because they all understood that what we share with another causes us to feel it flowing through us, because what flows through us sticks to us. And that's how we achieve and experience a direct encounter with who we really are, because there's only one of us in the room. Therefore, what I do for you, I do for me. And what I fail to do for you, I fail to do for me. Wow. Now, somebody said this 2,000 years ago. He simply put it in different words. He said, do unto others as you would have it done unto you. Quite simple. Too simple for us to adopt as a way of behaving, because we're still acting like 2-year-olds, as if we haven't been given the secret. And we've been given the secret over and over and over again. And folks, you're being given the secret again right now.
There are so many opportunities that I just want to pause and let our listeners soak in that. Thank you, Neale. That was beautiful. I've noticed over the years, my conversations with God are becoming more intimate and connected and more immediate, like the evolution from sporadic conversation to more of that constant online. And I share a story in the book. I'm going to skip over mine so we could bring in some of our other storytellers, but we can bring that in, Neale, if you feel you want to bring that back. But I had a bird story just recently that was so profound for me in my life. And it does speak to that intimacy with all of creation, not just the words or the intuitive ways that I used to communicate with God, but it just is so real. First, I'm going to bring in Emily Hine. And Emily is many things, a beautiful human being, an author, a teacher, so many things. But I just want to presence you also as the former chief of peace during this Peace Week for the Shift Network. Emily, you've been working in this realm of peace for so long. So I'm so happy to bring you in and let you share a little bit about your story. And if Neale wants to make some comments about it, that would be wonderful. Your story is riveting, Emily. So welcome.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Neale. Thank you, everybody, for showing up for Peace Week. This is one of my favorite weeks of the year because there's this energetic focus on how we can increase peace from an individual level to the collective. And so the story I'm going to share is the story in GodTalk, and it's called God's Last Call. And I'll share the abbreviated version with you, and then Neale would love to hear some of your reflections. So this was a story from many years ago. I was driving down the North Shore of Oahu with a friend of mine. And that's why you see the aloha picture behind me. I wanted to give a nod to Hawaii and the magical experiences that can happen there and really anywhere in the world. I was driving down the North Shore of Oahu with a friend of mine. And all of a sudden I felt this compulsion to pull the car over. And something was guiding me to walk to the beach. So I found my way to the beach, and my friend Tim was with me, and he knows I've had a lot of mystical experiences before, so he didn't question it. He just followed. And then I saw and felt this bright light just right above the horizon of the water. Now, it was midday, so this was not the sun. The sun was right above us, but this light was right above the horizon. And suddenly I felt this just incredible energy, almost a visceral and ecstatic energy that I couldn't deny. It became so overwhelming, and the light that I saw became so overwhelming that I literally collapsed. My body couldn't hold it. It was so intense. And I started sobbing because it felt like home to me. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't lose the experience. So I'm on the ground, I'm crying, I'm sobbing, I'm trying to stare at the light, but it sort of hurts at the same time. My friend Tim is supporting me. And all of a sudden I hear this booming voice, and the voice says, "You're going to want to be sober for this." Like, irrefutable. You're going to want to be sober for this. And I was like, oh, okay. Okay, whatever that means. I just wanted to feel the experience. I didn't hear another word. The energy stopped, and I sort of fell back as if I'd let go of a tug of war rope. And I just collapsed into my friend, and I couldn't speak for many, many minutes. And in fact, it took me a while to process this, but what I understood that to be was I had had mystical experiences, but I had never had a visceral experience like this of God. And it was irrefutable. So that was one thing. It was the physicalness of the message. The second was the message itself. You're going to want to be sober for this. Now, I'd come from a long line of Irish Catholics, and drinking was something we did in our pastime. So I had definitely abused alcohol in my life. But on a spiritual journey, I realized this doesn't help me stay present. This doesn't help me stay connected to source, to God, to my divinity. And so I knew that I needed to address not only alcohol, but anything else that was keeping me from full presence and full emotional sobriety. So I looked at what I call is in my vice chest: alcohol, food, binge watching TV, shopping, social media. It's like our whole world is designed to distract us from our divinity. And this message was, don't let that happen. You're going to want to be sober for this lifetime. And so that's what I took away from it. It was really about interrupting those patterns and staying fully awake to my life, my divinity, my connection to source, and most importantly, my connection to God. So that's my story.
Neale, do you want to comment at all?
I would comment very briefly because I want to get to the other stories as well as fast as we can. But I guess the comment that I would offer is that God can surprise us. Life surprises us. And God's presence can become apparent in unexpected, unforgettable, and miraculous events that really assure us of God's presence. So the message here is indelible, as Emily points out, that it's not just about alcohol. She received a true wake-up call. So don't take glorious moments for granted. That's what I would say as an observation on what was just shared with us by this wonderful lady. Don't take the glorious moments of your life for granted. There's more going on here than meets the eye. Or as Bill said years ago, and he wrote it in a wonderful play called Hamlet, and Bill wrote the following words: "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy."
Wonderful.
Well said. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce two people now. First, Reverend Dr. Tiffany Jean Barsotti. She's an internationally renowned medical intuitive and healer. And her husband's with her, Dr. Paul J. Mills, scientist, educator, and award-winning author. And both of them have a story in the book. Let's start with you, Tiff.
Thank you so much for this rich conversation. And Julie, I was sitting with this question that was also coming up from the deep well of, well, what does this conversation have to do with peace? And before outer peace can happen in the world, our inner peace is the most essential. And my experience that I share in the book about going through a personal heart scare that was happening actually while I was at graduate seminary. My whole life had been kind of turned upside down, topsy-turvy. And I had a front and center, all-encompassing view of Master Yeshua, Jesus, coming in front of me and exchanging my heart with his heart. And it was very simple commands of let go, let me in. And which was easy with all of that. But at the same time, you're sort of stunned in this light and experience, kind of like what Emily was talking about, that dropped you to your knees. And so that was a life, obviously, altering moment to allow that in. And now when I get into situations, I actually remember, you have my heart. And as a memory thing for me to continue with. And I was raised Catholic, where you're not supposed to have a conversation necessarily with God on your own or anything. And that's that separation theology, which I so appreciate as a term in the book. And so this was a new relationship, a personal relationship, much more deeply present for me than in anything that I could have ever read in a book or have an understanding of. So life-changing. And I am grateful, Neale, for all of your books. They have been extremely informative on my journey as well.
Thank you, Tiffany. And let me offer a quick observation here. God chooses to talk to us in ways that she knows we will understand. And that's what's important, because Tiffany received messages from God in a way that God knew that she would understand. So there was nothing mysterious about it. In fact, but be careful, because it's maybe sometimes so clear to you that you'll actually reject it. You'll say, it's just my imagination. I just imagine it. Or as a friend of mine said, you just want God to say to you what you think that God should say to you to make you feel better. Hello? That God, in fact, will make us feel better, and I've stopped rejecting the notion that God would not want us to feel as good as we can and to create the most wonderful life we possibly can while we're here in this particular incarnation. So what I get out of what I get out of this story from Tiffany is that God talks to all of us in the way that He knows we will most quickly and readily and easily understand. Don't reject it because it seems too simple. God is the simplest thing of all.
The simplest thing of all. I love that. And it makes sense when I talk about the evolution of me and my conversations, how they're evolving and getting more intimate, because what makes sense to me now, it's like that's growing and evolving as well. So
I can't even take credit. I can't even take credit for that statement, by the way. Leonard Bernstein wrote that in a marvelous stage piece that he created years ago called Mass. He actually took the Roman Catholic Mass and turned it into a stage production. And on that stage production, they sang a song in which he wrote in the lyric line, God is the simplest thing of all.
I love that. Wow. Beautiful line. Beautiful line. It seems like it's so not simple. So this is good medicine for all of us to hear during this week. Paul, share your story with us.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I'd be happy to. And my story has resonance with aspects that Tiff was just sharing about this, this request, almost a command to let go. And it also has resonance, Neale, with what you were speaking about a bit ago, of the reality of the oneness of us with God as God individuated in part within the world itself. So some years ago, I was taking a walk and essentially opened up to the presence of God. And this experience, as it unfolded, it was immediately evident to me of what I was stepping into. And I thought to myself, I've been waiting for this my entire life. And this presence came in and out of my life over the course of several weeks. And it was slowly and beautifully transformative to me. And it was really initially more of a one-way experience where I was perceiving the presence of God and God herself deep within this presence. And then one day, as the presence reemerged back to me, something had shifted. And the shift was now this presence of God was more interactive with me. And essentially, the interaction at that point was this voice came out of the presence and said, it's time to let go of yourself. As soon as I heard those words, I had some fear enter up into me because I wondered, well, what does this mean? And if I do that, will I still exist once I let go of myself, the person I thought I was all these years? But of course, I did. I listened, I acknowledged, I thought if there's ever a time to do it, it's now, in this beautiful, loving, encompassing presence of God and light. And when I did that, what happened? Well, there was a massive immediate shift in my consciousness and sense of self. And my sense of self that I had prior to that really, honestly, just dissolved away. And it was replaced with a different sense of self. And that sense of self was much more vast and really an intimate part of the presence that I had been coming and going from for those many weeks. And that is really the story I'd like to share.
And what that does for a person in life is that it answers the inevitable question. There's one question that most people ask at least once in their life, if not over and over again. Who am I? Is this who I am? Am I this? Am I my body? Or is this who I am? Am I my mind? Or am I my body and my mind? And what Paul experienced, you guys got to get this. What he experienced is what all of us experience when we come upon the eternal truth, which is that I am neither this nor this. I'm a third thing. I am, in fact, something much more vast than either of these two finite aspects of reality. I am a spiritual entity. And that spiritual entity is simply an individual expression of the spiritual essence that we call God. And I'm now experiencing that in this body and in this mind for a particular reason. And when we understand why we're using the body and the mind at this particular point in eternity, suddenly everything changes. Our whole raison d'etre, our whole reason for living changes dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. I just want to encourage all the listeners, if you love what you're hearing, there's so much more in this book. It's really, it's so nice how it moves through. And there's a lot of other stories of other people contributing, sharing their GodTalk stories. So today in this final section, before we wrap up, I want to just address God and peace again. Neale, you gave us a beautiful response to that. And we have the rest of us are here. And so I want to address this, why we need to talk about God and what these stories have done for Emily, you, Tiffany, Paul, like sharing this story. How does that, Tiffany, you acknowledged it's the inner peace thing, but when we talk about culture in the world and we're focused on global peace as well as inner peace, why do we need to talk about God? Emily, I'm going to start with you.
No, you're not going to start with Emily because I'm going to interrupt. I'm going to stop. See, I'm going to take the word need out of that sentence. You said it twice, and I caught it twice. And I said,
yes.
Why do we need to talk about? We don't need to do anything. We are in. Why are we invited to talk about God?
Yeah, there we go.
Because the first illusion of humans is that need exists. Communion with God, chapter 1, page 1. Need does not exist. So now, why are we invited to talk about God, and why would it benefit us to do so? That's the question.
Perfect question. Emily, you're up.
Hallelujah. Well, there are a few reasons, but I think I'll start with this. Last night, I was under the stars asking what's most important to share tomorrow. And I heard 1, tell them everything. 2, you're awakening right on time. And that message was for everybody who attends today. You're awakening right on time. 3, have fun. Have fun. And I think Neale brings that. He brought that in the green room before we even started. Mystical messages and experiences can be intense. They can be intimidating. They can sometimes be super confusing. But guess what? When we run around and we start sharing these stories with others, and it's sort of that moment of, oh my gosh, you too? Yeah, me too. And it was a mystical moment, and I can't wait to share it with you. And when we do that, we are now giving each other that permission to share those truths, right? One of the themes that I noticed in the book was about surrender, and surrender requires trust. Well, how do you build trust? You build trust by sharing stories and showing that you're not alone, that this happens to Neale, this happens to Paul, this happens to Julie, it happens to Tiffany, it happens to Emily, it happens to the 70 plus 100,000 people who are part of these conversations. And once we start talking about it, surrendering becomes so much easier. And now, guess what? We're in a position to co-create with the universe. We're in a position to co-create with God, and anything we need to heal, we can heal. And then we can be of service to others and lift them up to the same kind of conversation. That's why we have to talk about it.
How do you build trust? By realizing that you don't need to trust. Trust is only experienced by an entity that thinks that certain outcomes must occur. So, but you don't, conversations with God told us very clearly, you don't need to trust anything because you don't need anything in particular to occur. Opportunities will exist day to day, moment to moment, as is happening in your life right now, those of you who are watching this program, to expand your awareness and your understanding of who you truly are. Just go out onto the street this afternoon or tomorrow morning and touch every person whose life that you encounter with the love of who you are and of who they are. That's all you have to do. And you don't have to trust for any particular outcome because you're not doing it to create a particular outcome. Let us stop loving each other as a means of getting something from the other. Let us love each other the way God loves us. Finding the joy in the expression of love itself. And that's the beginning and the end of it. That's the glory and the wonder of who we are. Thank you, wonderful Emily, for telling us that wonderful story. Wow.
Finding the joy in the expression of love. Beautiful. Tiffany, God and peace. What would you like to share?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. The way I'm experiencing this is to make our relationship personal and to step from this conditional love to unconditional love. And I think that is the opportunity to step into and to trust ourselves that it's actually safe to have a conversation, our own conversations with God. And, it's sad that so many belief systems have existed out there that really have a lot to do with power and control and not about humanity growing into being itself. And that's the opportunity that we really have today. And it's about an independent relationship with God, independent from religion. It's personal. And once it becomes more personal for each and every one of us, like Neale, you shared the statistic, 85% believe that there is a higher power. But what exactly? What are more of the opportunities that we get to have as we really open our own kimono, forgive, heal, allow there to be a really mystical change and experience for every single one of us in unconditional love.
And do it in a way that serves your soul's agenda, because I want to put in one sentence here, because why are we here? What are we doing? If we really are a spiritual entity living a human experience, why? And the answer becomes really simple. We've come here in order to demonstrate and to express and to experience who we really are. Because we don't want to just know who we are. We want to experience it. The example I used, when I was 16 years old, I knew all about sex. I was told all about sex. I saw all the pictures. I watched a couple of movies, but I never actually had sex. I didn't want to just know about it. I wanted to experience it. It's kind of a humorous way of looking at it, but that's how the soul experiences life. All of life is sex, synergistic energy exchange. And we yearn to experience, not simply to know who we really are. That's why we are here. And the fastest way to know who you really are is to point out to everyone else whose life you touch who they really are.
Perfect. Paul, talking about God and peace.
Got a minute and a half, Paul.
I know, aware. Okay. God and peace, well, they're synonyms in many ways. When we experience God, we experience peace. And so many of the great teachers have told us that this is a peace that passeth all understanding. And that once we have it within our own self, then it's easy to disseminate and share that around the world. It's a natural consequence when we're all carrying that peace within us, that knowledge that we are not separate from, that we are one and part of the divinity itself and all of creation, then our outer world changes. And Neale, you spoke to this at the very beginning, how this is really a game changer for how we as human beings see each other in the world, how we behave in the world, and then consequently what the world will be, what it will become. So thank you for today.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing to add because Julie's got about 30 seconds to get out of here.
We're going to go just a few more minutes as we close. We've got permission to do that. So we're going to close in about 3 minutes. So Neale, if you want to say anything about Paul, then I'm going to ask you for a few last words before I bring it to a close.
No, I think that Paul made it very clear and very simple and in his wonderfully direct and personal ways. So thank you, Paul, for the sharing that came from you. Now, what people ask me, often people have asked me, what is the single most important message that I ever received in my conversation with God? Somebody asked me, please, somebody has to ask me.
Neale, what is the one single most important thing that you've learned over all these years? Because you've influenced millions of people on the planet. Surely you can teach us one thing.
Strange you should ask. I said to God, if there was something that I'm really supposed to understand that I don't fully understand, what would it be? And she said, oh, honey, it's so simple. It's so simple. You think your life is about you, and your life has nothing to do with you. Your life is about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. But when you understand that, you will experience that life in the biggest sense is about you. It's not about little you, small you. It's about big you. It's about universal you. Because, Neale, there's only one of us in the room.
Just want
I
to
could, of
pause.
course, be wrong about all of that, but I don't think so.
There's lots of people whispering in the Zoom room with us and listening to this broadcast. I don't think so. Yeah. Neale, thank you for bringing your wisdom, for sharing this, there's so many other beautiful stories in the middle of this, but there's so many teaching tools and really practical ways that the reader can deepen into a conversation with God. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with us here today. And Emily, Tiffany, Paul, thank you for sharing your stories and your wisdom. It's beautiful that we have the spiritual wisdom keepers and the scientists all present here that can say, yes, this is real. Let's do it. So thank you all for joining us here.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. Thank you. Listeners, thank you for joining us and listening in. I want to invite you to continue the conversation in the connection field. It's a global initiative with dozens of cooperative organizations like Unify, HeartMath, Global Coherence Pulse, and Good of the Whole. So you can go to the connection field, connectionfield.net, and it's free. You just sign in and you can become a member and be present there. It's like a big social media place. We are literally having a post about let's talk about God. So look for that post and come join the conversation, share your stories, and let's talk about God. We're so happy to host that conversation and to continue on. We'll also have a community celebration and the opening of the Coherence Cafe on Tuesday, October 3rd at 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern. So watch for those announcements. Come into the connection field and join us there. And I just want to extend deep gratitude to Ben and the whole team of Unity Earth and what we're doing for Peace Week and bringing that together. And thank you to Ariel, Patricia, and Sacred Stories, bringing this amazing series, Common Sentience series, to all of us, including Neale's GodTalk. So thank you all, and we so appreciate you. So for now, we'll say goodbye.